Jason, as it is every single week, today's episode of Lee Summit Town Hall is brought to you by our good friends, Budget Blinds of Lee Summit.
Budget Blinds!
I'm going to say this. I feel confident enough. I love those guys.
They're awesome. Awesome.
They are good people, good members of our community, and you know, they provide the best place to do stuff for your home.
It's true. And you know what else they're going to do? They're bringing you the future.
The future is already here. If you go to our friends at Budget Blinds, it's automation.
Automation.
You know, those automated shades, they provide a safer environment for everyone, especially your kids. You get rid of those cords, they're bad things.
Right. They do provide a danger.
Pets are safer. And here's the fun part. I mean, like, safety's important, right? But are you ready for the fun part?
Yeah, well, really, let's sell it.
This is about laziness. Smart home features are about laziness, right?
The future is me sitting on my couch, doing things far away from my phone.
And my shades, my window treatments,
Up,
automated,
down,
programmable.
Open, closed, boom.
If you want to add those features to your house, do you know where you can go, Jason?
I'm going to guess. Budget Blinds of Lee Summit.
Budget Blinds of Lee Summit. Go visit them right in the heart of downtown. Tell them Jason and Nick sent you.
Hello again, and welcome to Lee Summit Town Hall, a weekly podcast about what you can do to make a difference. I'm Jason Norbury, and as always, I am joined by a man who will miss Martin Maldonado, but is ready for Bubba time.
You know, you're not wrong.
I'm saying. Well, you miss them all.
I do. I mean, like, I get emotionally attached to Royals players.
Even ones that we brought in like 6 minutes ago and are gone in like 10 minutes after that.
And even the ones, look, even the ones during the bad years, the dark years, even those players that really were lacking in talent, I grew attached to them. They're my team, man.
But Bubba Starling is our ray of sunshine.
We hope.
Well, at least a ray of sunshine.
A ray of sunshine. But hey, we'll miss you, Martin.
That voice you hear, of course, is Nick Parker, the publisher of Link to Lee Summit, the source for all the news you need about this very fine city. And our unofficial sponsor today is the beer that is waiting for us at the end of this podcast.
It is Tuesday, and we are recording for Wednesday's episode. And, Jason, you have been promised a beverage after the show.
Dun-dun!
Hey, let's go through a couple of things this week. I don't think it's going to be a real long show, Jason. There's not a lot going on. There's a couple of things that I want to pick your brain about that I think are interesting. It's nerdy for me and you, and I think there's a few other people who will be interested in talking about this process a little bit. But before we get there, as a member of the Lee Summit Arts Council, I feel obligated to pass on a little bit of information. If you are running an arts organization or you're an artist now is the time to apply for grants from the Lee Summit Arts Council.
Woo, free money.
So if you go to the cityofls.net, to the city's website, and you go to the Arts Council section, you can find grant applications there, and that will run through August 1st.
All right, so that's a good one. The other thing that's going on, and we've mentioned this one before, that it is coming on the 30th anniversary of Downtown Lee Summit as an organization, and they are looking for photos, videos, and memories to help tell the story of downtown. And they want to build a collection that helps document the events, businesses, buildings, people, and all the things that have made Downtown Lee Summit a very special place. And I think you and I will agree that we both think that Downtown Lee Summit is a very special place to us.
It really is. It's a gem of our community. I think you know we use the term right in the heart of the city, but that is what it is. It's kind of it's a hub. There's a not just economic hub, but it's a cultural hub. There's buzz around, and really there's no more fun place to be, Jason.
Absolutely. So if you have those sorts of things, videos, stories, photos, ideas, things of that nature, submit those to info@downtownls.org by Friday, August 2nd. Friday, August 2nd. And you can also mail a physical copy to the office in downtown itself.
And if you send physical copies, they will make sure they get back to you, so you don't have to worry about losing them. I'm going to say this.
I like how you give Donnie and the staff extra work there.
I'm going to say this. They are responsible folk running the Main Street office, so you will get your things back. Do not fret. Jason, let's dig into the heart of the show now. You had something come before you on Planning Commission last week that I thought was interesting. The topic itself probably wasn't that interesting. It's a residential development, which we see lots of those come into Lee's Summit. But the conversation that came out of it was really one about infrastructure and about taking a part of our city and updating it, modernizing it, and who pays for that? Is that something that we expect developers to always pay for? Is there a chunk of that or all of that the city is responsible for? And this is an ongoing conversation and process between the development community and the city about where that balance lies and who's responsible for what. Can you kind of fill us in a little bit? I guess kind of start us off what we're talking about and then how we get into that conversation.
Sure. All right. So this was a proposed project, and it is still in the process. So I'm not going to get too much into the pluses and minuses of the project itself, since it will come back before the Planning Commission before this is all said and done. But
this really isn't about the project itself. I think
Right.
I think what struck me and you as interesting was that extra piece of it, because there are parts of our community all over that are in dire need of some upgrades,
right,
some sewer upgrades and things like that.
Short version is at the intersection of Olive and Orchard, just south of Chipman Road, and just a little bit west of Douglas, in an older part of what we call Old Lee Summit itself. There was a proposal to put in 36 townhomes on some acreage. The short and long version of it is that the city has an unimproved road policy, and essentially it says that if you are in a residential area and you want to do a redevelopment or a development, that you need to make sure that the roads are meeting what they call an urban standard, and that's short basically for curbs, gutters, and underground stormwater pipes.
Does that include like width of road too? Because
the roads get a little bit wider. In this case, those roads are about 22 feet wide. So just if you have a car parked on either side, you really only have room for one car to really safely or conveniently travel down. And so they're very slow, small residential roads. And so they would expand that to 24 feet, 26 feet to create a little bit more space, create some rooms. The residents talked about how fire trucks and school buses had difficulty navigating that particular intersection. They talked about the issues of stormwater that they suffer from, and that is a little bit separated from what goes on the project site, but we'll go with that. So there were all these issues that the residents came and said, we have these problems and we're worried that this project will exacerbate it or not make it better. So as part of the road policy, the staff said as one of the conditions that they want that the developer would have to improve Olive from Chipman down to Orchard, and then Orchard from Olive to Douglas, because those are the ways that people would access that site. And that's about 3,000 linear feet of street, and that's a really big expense to tack on to a developer.
That is not a small amount of road.
Right. And so what one of the things that was raised, and one of the things that I said at the time, was that it's a question, is it fair? There's two sides. Is it fair to put that large, especially as a percentage of a project, infrastructure burden on a developer? And the developer said that if that were the case, that they couldn't do the project. It would not be economically feasible for them. But on the flip side, can we, in good faith, put a project in that doesn't address these really important lacking infrastructure pieces that these people are suffering from? Because the addition of curbs and gutters, a little bit wider street, the proper stormwater management techniques on there would have a real material impact on the people who live there.
Well, and I think that gets into the conversation of responsibility, right? So is that the responsibility of the developer to bring things up to modern standards, or is it the responsibility of the city to keep get things to that standard so that it attracts new development in.
Right.
And I think that's where the conversation about balance and responsibility really comes into play.
Right, and the city has this is standard for the city. I mean, so the city,
And I think it should be noted that this is standard in just about every suburban municipality.
When a developer comes in, they're expected to bring the infrastructure around them up to snuff. The downtown apartment complex has to address the stormwater and the sewer issues that might stem from putting all of those residents in a 100-year-old neighborhood, or any of the apartment complexes. The streets of West Pryor have to deal with all of their stormwater and make sure that the roads are done, and they're doing extra stuff to manage the Lowenstein Park that's right next door to enhance that, to do things that minimize the impact around their project as a whole. So this is normal.
Where does and I might be jumping too far ahead in this, where does scale of project play into that? Because you mentioned the downtown apartment project, you mentioned streets of West Pryor. If you're talking about those along with this proposed project that came before you, and again, I don't want to get too specific on it because it's probably coming back, but those aren't apples to apples comparisons. One is a few $100 million, and one is a few $1 million.
Right. Well, I'll give you, so obviously the larger the scale of a project, the more willing they are to take on larger pieces of infrastructure. And in many cases, they're also willing to ask for incentives to help pay for some of those infrastructure. So the downtown apartment, obviously the parking garage was a required piece of infrastructure that they're dealing with through the TIF and the other incentive projects that they've got. I'll give you an example that has come through Planning Commission and is actually up on the City Council for second reading, I believe, this week, is the proposed ARIA apartments that are going to be just north of Colburn on Douglas/Lee Summit Road. They're sort of across from the airport.
That northwest corner,
right? That northwest corner. So the way the street improvement road thing would be is it would have required the developer to improve and put sidewalks on both sides of Douglas/Lee Summit Road for the entire length of their project. Well, the opposite side is the airport. And so there's not, there's an argument to be had. So they wanted to do sidewalks on just one portion on the development, but not on both sides of the street and all that. And I believe, if I recall correctly, Planning Commission put as a condition that they had to have sidewalk and gutter on just their side of the street, but for the entire length of the property, all the way from Douglas up through where the apartment complex is going to be.
Right.
And what City Council will do with those requirements is up to them. But those are the questions. So those are balances that can be found. But those large projects, like a large apartment complex, is spending significant more money than one small townhome. But I think that the question is at a certain point, you reach a point where, in a situation like this, if we take the developer at their word, which is always a little dangerous, but we'll take them at their word that that cost would make a project unfeasible and they wouldn't do it. Then you have frozen a situation where there is no chance for redevelopment or improvement of an area without some sort of infrastructure investment, and that's where the city has to come and make those decisions there. So it'll be interesting as it finishes winding its way through Planning Commission and eventually up to City Council, how the City Council wants to address that going forward.
Right, and I think it's important to note that there really isn't a right or wrong answer. We don't know, but it is just something, I think, for people to understand that process and the weighing that the council and the development community have to do. And you hinted at this a little bit. We're not going to get into it today because I think that's a whole other hour or so conversation, but that also plays into the incentives request that we see. And I think it's important for people to note how those processes work and the things that are being considered by our elected officials and by our appointed commissioners like you, because we do end up having, then the public, we can come up, and they make their talks and their points about how incentives play and how different developers need to do certain aspects of infrastructure development. So I think it's just important that people know that process and what things are being considered.
And I would say that stormwater is one that just is a real bear. That was something that the city neglected for a very, very long time. And now a lot of these parts of town,
all of District 4,
downtown Lee Summit, if you look in the old downtown area, there are a lot of sections of that don't have curbs or gutters. They're ditch-based stormwater treatment. It is legitimately problematic. And how the city is going to address those and promote development at the same time is a real tough question.
I think what I want to do now, Jason, is I kind of want to shift gears a little bit. There's one other topic that it's not a hot topic in the community right now, but I think with our one of our goals is to help keep people informed on things, especially as they head to the ballot box. And there is an election coming up in a few weeks. There is one item on it. It is a general obligation bond issue for the city. This is not the sexiest thing in the world, Jason, and they're not asking for bond money to do some development. Well, there's no infrastructure development in this.
You could argue that the fire stations are infrastructure.
I guess, okay, you can make that argument. This is mostly a public safety. You just mentioned fire department. This is mostly a public safety. This will affect the fire department and the police department. This is to replace two aging fire stations, and this is to provide some updates for the police department headquarters and training facility and the courts, and then provide some other things like body cams for the police department. Jason, we've talked about it a little bit, but I think you should set this up again. This is being put on the ballot because the city has an obligation to keep a bond going.
Yes. Okay. So it's an interesting, because of the intricacies of Missouri's constitutional law, the Hancock Amendment, some other things of that nature. It is useful for the city to maintain a certain level of indebtedness as sort of an ongoing thing to help fund capital projects and what have you. And if they drop too far below, then they have to they're not allowed to work within those ranges without doing a what would be considered a tax increase, and then that has a whole different set of issues. So the August 6th is we've all heard this language before, a no tax increase bond issue. Essentially, it's just rolling over some debt we've done a bunch of projects with a certain amount of debt, we've paid it off, now we're going to do some new projects with this debt, we're just going to roll it over, and it's no change in our milled rates for our property taxes.
Right. Your taxes will not be raised because of this.
Right.
And it's important, I think, always to note that. What I think is a little interesting, I guess, just based on recent history and all of the issues that have gone before voters recently, there really isn't a lot of chatter about this one. Certainly I have heard almost no voices against this issue. There are some voices for. There is a political action committee, Friends of Lee Summit, that is out encouraging people to vote for this. The Lee Summit Chamber of Commerce has issued a news release saying that they are supporting the bond issue, as well as the Lee Summit Economic Development Council. And I think it would be fairly easy, Jason, for us to come up with all the reasons why to support it, and we're going to have someone from Friends of Lee Summit on next week to talk about it, and we're going to ask them why is this a big deal to you? Why is it worth a PAC putting money and effort behind it that they do? What I want to ask you, Jason, is what should a voter be considering? What are there cons to this? Are there things? Are there issues in that make you consider whether or not it's a yes or no vote?
I think there's a subset of the population who will vote against any sort of a tax issue at all. Like, they don't want to. Their rule is, they have a bright line rule: we're going to pay less taxes if it purports to keep them the same or increase them. I'm against it. If it's going to reduce them, I'm for it. But those are not people that are certainly not looking at the issues critically. And just as if someone were to say, well, and I don't know who this would be, but sure, if the city thinks it's a good idea, we're for it, right? Just no matter what, we're going to go for it. So I don't think those are
I think there are 9 people on a dais who would love to meet that person.
Yeah, they'd all fight to have them in. Hey, move to my district. So, so you're right, there has been. And And to be fair, most of these non-tax increase bond issues have passed with pretty overwhelming margins. Often 60% are 2-to-1 margins.
And in our city's past, especially when you attach public safety, we have a very high standard in this community for public safety. Mm-hmm. And so generally when those things come up before the voters, we tend to pass them.
Right. And so I think if you were looking for areas to critically evaluate, you could get into the concept of most of these bond issues are for capital type projects, if we call it, so they're infrastructure like things. New fire stations, I think, fall into that. Your acquisition of land, building buildings, those are capital investments. Whether or not body cameras fall into this, and the question came on the prior one we had a year or two ago. There were new air tanks for the fire department. Now that bond issue once again passed fine, but I think there's a question that could be raised: is that does that qualify as the kind of capital expense that we would traditionally think of a bond issue being for? For instance, the school district's bond issues, when they do a bond issue for a capital improvement, they're not buying supplies for the classrooms.
Right.
They're buying buildings and refurbishing buildings and structures and things of that nature. So you can raise that question. You and I have both heard a little bit of rumbling in small amounts. I mean, not in any significant, that the process by which we got to this bond issue was less inclusive of public input than we've had in the past. It was very council driven. You could argue it was very mayoral driven, but by all means, it was certainly for the electeds were the ones that
it was from the dais.
Right. It was from the dais, and they pushed that process through without a huge amount of input. And I think in the past there has been at least the perception that there has been a little bit more of a groundswell from groups like Friends of Lee Summit and other people in the community of things that they wanted to achieve that put them behind those things coming on the bond issue ahead of time, not on the back of time. And I think there was some discontent would probably be the best way to put that with that part of the process.
And I think that is a valid issue to take for some people. I think Lee Summit has a history of citizen involvement, of citizen groups, whether they be organized PACs or not, of pushing those kinds of agendas and bringing to the attention of our elected officials, here are some projects that we really want to see done so that we can continue to evolve and grow as a community. And look, nobody can argue the last 20 to 30 years, the kind of growth Lee Summit has seen.
Absolutely, absolutely. So those are some of the ones that we've heard. I'm going to raise a slightly different one. I'm not sure they actually are wanting to spend enough money.
That was going to be my next question to you, because you brought that up, that when you were talking about the procedure, that they could have asked for more and they could have added other projects. Do the regulations from the state constitution, do they require you to do a certain amount?
No, I think it's just a function of maintaining a bond rate, which maintains the mill levy that we charge. So it's the percentage of the value of your home that we charge you for taxes. And I think that the amount that they wanted to do, they needed to get above a certain amount just to keep within the bandwidth that they needed to keep the mill levy steady, essentially. So it is, I would call it probably an aim at good governance by keeping things in sort of a steady state without having sudden, obviously there's been a lot of chatter out there in the news and the public about the appraised values of homes have jumped up, and not as much out here in Lee Summit, but in a lot of places in the county, appraised values have jumped, and that causes a shock to a lot of budgets, especially people on more fixed incomes. And there's been a lot of consternation about that. We want to avoid that. That's kind of like an own goal or shooting yourself in the foot. Right. If you reduce it, then you go, oh, wait, but we have these infrastructure needs. And then all of a sudden you have to pass this bond and it's going to increase people's taxes. People are less likely to vote for that than they is. And I don't remember the last time that the city asked for an increase in the tax amounts to do that sort of a thing. So it's been a long time. But to tie it back to what we were talking about earlier, several years ago, I think it's actually at the same time that the Legacy Park edition was done and some of those, there was a bond issue. Part of the bond issue was for improvement of Orchard in downtown from Douglas east to Independence. They widened the street, they added curbs, gutters, sidewalks, they had all that stuff was on there. And it made a huge difference. I lived in the neighborhood at the time. It made a huge difference in the walkability of the neighborhood. A lot of downtown, which is the most walkable piece of our community, doesn't have sidewalks. And so then you've got kids walking in the streets or, diving in and out of the ditches or things of that nature. And that's not a really good environment for encouraging the kinds of pedestrian action that we want to see. So they could have, if they had looked forward enough to do that, or someone had raised this issue, looked at a bond issue to do that work on the west side of Orchard, and perhaps even the Olive done, and done some of, if not all of, that preparatory infrastructure to allow for the development that we're looking for on these projects. And that would encourage more housing development in this old part of downtown, which is something that the city has had as one of its goals for some time, and doing it without having apartments and tall things is just to infill a lot of the pieces that we've got there. So,
well, I think that ties. I think that ties back into what we were talking about at the very beginning of the show, which is responsibility. What is the responsibility of the city when it comes to attracting developers in? Should they use these kind of bonds then, like you said, to modernize, to upgrade some of the areas so that it will attract more development? Is that the best use of that kind of funds, and is that a priority for a city?
Well, and I think that there's multiple questions, right? We had another bond, a no tax increase bond issue that put a lot of money towards doing some stormwater work out in District 4 on the east side of town. And it was something that then Council Member Mosby was very passionate about getting passed, and got passed and put onto the bond. And that work is being done. And so, that's not going to necessarily gin up a whole bunch of new development out. That's areas around that have been relatively well developed with single family subdivisions. They're not going to change, but it has a significant improvement on the quality of life of those residents. Well, even if you're not really pushing for development, improving the quality of life of the residents along Olive and Orchard is something that's worth doing potentially, and bringing those neighborhoods up to these modern standards will have an impact on those people, will improve their property values, as well as, hopefully in many cases eliminate or significantly reduce the amount of stormwater and flooding issues that they may have.
Well, before I get to, I want to ask one question then to set up the next one. How often does the city need to do this process?
I think they do. It's almost annual. I think they have a number of bond issues that are running on these 5 and 10, 15-year cycles. And so it's not every year, but it does come up on a fairly regular basis. And I don't have, I'm sure that we could find someone in the city who could give us a great detailed chart of when all of the bond obligations come.
I need my red phone straight to City Manager Steve Arbo's desk.
Yes.
Like, whenever I have
Steve,
a question,
give me a chart.
That neither one of us have the answer to for that. I want to be able to phone him in and we get an answer.
Is that our RBAT phone?
That's our RBAT phone. I like it. Well done. Well, the reason I asked that question is I think is the thing maybe you and I are putting out to listeners and to residents is think of all of these things and projects that you think are important for quality of life, for attracting future development, so that maybe then the next time the city starts thinking about these bonds and what projects they should put before the voters, maybe there can be that kind of ground up push that some say wasn't there this time around.
Right. And this may be, this project on this, with this particular development may be the spark that pushes some of that. We put forth some money for those kinds of improvements for developed but unimproved roads that we've got in Lee Summit, especially perhaps in downtown. So yeah, I think that's something, and it gives if it's a project that you think is worthwhile, then you can give that voice. And as we have learned, individuals have a lot of power when it comes to influencing our elected officials here at the city level. So it's worth doing.
Well, that's what we like to say, because really, Jason, you have no more opportunity to affect change than you do right here in our own backyard. And as we lead up to this election, we hinted at it earlier. Next week we're gonna have someone on from the Friends of Lee Summit show. So we're gonna ask them a few questions about this bond issue and why this group is getting involved. And as we know, the political action committees have access to people and money to really push these issues. So we're going to talk a little bit to that person and that group. That's going to wrap up our show for this week. We will be back on Friday with a Friday conversation. Jason, are you ready for this?
You're not going to tell me what I want to know.
No, you're not. I'm going to tease you just a little bit. A local best-selling author. I mean, really.
But now I just want to know who it is.
I'm not going to tell you. You got to tune in Friday on the Lee Summit Town Hall podcast, and then you'll find it all out. Today's episode of Lee Summit Town Hall is brought to the good people of Lee Summit by Shred KC.
Also good people.
They are good people. You know, we are lucky, Jason, in that our sponsors and partners that we've been able to work in. And now we've done a lot of episodes, Jason.
I know. Let's not talk about that.
We've done a lot of episodes, but we've been lucky to work with some really good people that are doing good things. And I'm just going to tell you right now, the folk at Shred KC and owner Ryan Waters, not just good for everybody else, it's good for me, Jason.
And
it's
now
good for me.
We've finally gotten down to the core of the subject matter. What's good for Nick?
What's good for Nick is good for everybody else. I think that really is the crux of all of this. I was not a fit. I'm still not there, but I was not a fit and healthy guy, and I knew I needed to make a change. I was nervous. I was hesitant, and I just finally made myself go in and ask, and they've been very, very supportive in helping me come up with a meal plan and making better, healthy decisions as I eat. And I'm even starting to work out a little bit now that the broken wing is healed. I'm gonna get there pretty soon. You're gonna go look at those posters, and it's gonna be me.
Are you gonna be lifting double-digit pounds?
I'm not there yet.
Okay, well, let me know when you cross that particular.
I'm not there
Rubicon.
yet. No. The arm can get me to 7 pounds.
Well, that's something. I mean, you had you were building up and you had a huge setback, and now you're back. You're climbing back up.
I'm climbing back up, and the scale is climbing back down.
So you can't beat that.
So look, if you are ready to make some changes to try to live a little bit more healthy lifestyle, go see our friends at Shred KC. Tell them Jason Nixie. You have been listening to Lee Summit Town Hall, a Link to Lee Summit podcast with hosts Nick Parker and Jason Norberry. A proud member of the Fredcast Network, you can subscribe to this podcast on most of your favorite podcast apps and catch us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for all the news, analysis, and conversations on the Lee Summit community. Connect with us on Facebook at Link to Lee Summit or on Twitter at LS Town Hall.